$5 for the beast. The dog no one wanted, but everyone needed. On an ordinary summer evening in the small town of Maple Creek, a father and his little girl turned a corner and walked into a story that would change their lives forever. He was a seasoned police officer, weary from years of seeing too much, carrying quiet loneliness beneath his uniform. She was just 8 years old, full of light and curiosity, skipping at his side. And there, at the corner, sat a ragged man with a cardboard sign. $5 for the beast. Beside him lay a German shepherd, ribs showing, ears bent, scars carved deep into his body. To most, he looked broken, worthless. But to the little girl, his eyes told another story. Of pain, yes, but also of hope. She tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering, "Please, Daddy, we can't leave him." What followed wasn't just the rescue of a dog. It was the unraveling of secrets, the discovery of a hidden world of cruelty and redemption, and the healing of a family who didn't know how much they needed saving too. Stay with me, because this story will break your heart, and then piece it back together. The evening sun lingered low over Maple Creek, brushing the storefront windows in liquid gold. The little town seemed to hold its breath in that rare hour when day softened into night. Dust motes shimmered in the air as if the light itself had slowed down to rest. Maple Creek wasn't large. 2 main streets intersecting near the courthouse, a scattering of shops, a diner with a tin roof that clicked in the heat. For Daniel Hayes, it was both familiar and strange, a place where routine kept people safe. Yet memories always lurked at the edges of silence. Daniel walked with steady strides, his broad shoulders carrying both strength and something heavier, an invisible weight he never spoke of. At 40, he looked older than he ought to, not by his hair, which remained a thick brown with only faint silver near the temples, but by his eyes. They were gray, the kind of gray that told stories of long nights on patrol, of things witnessed and never forgotten. Some men wore their uniforms like armor, even off-duty. Daniel wore his years like that, every wrinkle, every crease at the corner of his mouth, a record of battles fought inside and out. Beside him skipped Lily, her small sneakers tapping on the sidewalk like a rhythm that didn't belong to him, but had long since become the beat of his life. She was 8 years old, a bundle of energy, curiosity, and questions that never seemed to run dry. Tonight she wore her favorite denim overalls over a yellow t-shirt, her hair a cascade of messy curls tied back with a pink ribbon that bounced with every step. Her hand clutched a small notebook filled with doodles and half-written stories, treasures she often carried even on walks. "Oh, Daddy, look!" she cried suddenly, pointing at a storefront where a calico cat lay sprawled in the display window of the hardware shop. Its fur glowed copper in the sunlight. "He's sleeping with his paw over his nose, just like Buddy used to." Daniel followed her gaze, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Buddy. That had been the dog his parents kept on their farm when Daniel was still a boy. Long before police academy, long before the divorce, long before the silence he now lived in. He nodded. "You notice everything, don't you, Lily?" She grinned, proud of herself. "Grandma used to say, you find the best stories when you look at the small things. Like this." She lifted her notebook. "I think that cat's dreaming of chasing fireflies." Daniel chuckled softly. It was in moments like these he felt the sharpest contrast between his daughter's world and his own. Her eyes were still unclouded, bright with wonder. His were trained to scan for threats, to predict harm before it happened. She saw stories. He saw statistics. She believed people were good until proven otherwise. He knew too well the opposite. Yet, walking with her in the amber light, he allowed himself to believe for just a moment that maybe she was right. The sidewalks of Maple Creek carried echoes of his past. He had patrolled these streets countless nights, responding to bar fights, petty thefts, arguments that grew too loud. And yet, it wasn't the job that had hardened him most. It was what came after. 3 years since his marriage had shattered, leaving him to raise Lily alone. 3 years of late nights making boxed macaroni, of folding little socks while his own shirts sat wrinkled, of fighting off loneliness that pressed in like a storm. Still, if there was one thing that steadied him, it was the small hand that swung in his now, sticky with the faint sugar of an earlier ice cream cone. Raising Lily wasn't easy, but it was the one duty he had never once considered abandoning. "Daddy," Lily said after a long pause, her tone quieter now. "Do you ever feel lonely?" The question caught him off guard. He glanced down at her, the ribbon in her hair catching the last flare of sunlight. She wasn't looking at him, but at the horizon where the rooftops met the sky. Children asked questions carelessly, like tossing stones into a river without knowing how deep it ran. "I have you," Daniel said simply. She smiled at that, but he could see she wanted more. He cleared his throat. "Sometimes, yes. But you know what helps?" "What?" she asked, wide-eyed. "Walking with you. Listening to you talk about cats dreaming of fireflies. It reminds me that the world isn't all bad." She squeezed his hand tighter. That was Lily, an anchor without knowing it. They passed the old bookstore, windows dusty, shelves still visible through the glass, though no one had opened its doors in years. Lily stopped to peer inside, pressing her face against the pane. "It looks sad," she whispered. Like all the stories are waiting for someone to listen again. Daniel felt something stir inside him. He hadn't thought of the store in years, but he remembered once buying a book there for his wife, back when laughter still lived in their home. He swallowed the memory and pulled Lily gently along. The sound of laughter drifted from across the street, where teenagers gathered near the diner, their voices carrying hope he barely remembered. A breeze stirred, bringing with it the smell of fried onions and gasoline. Daniel felt the pull of routine. He knew every crack in these sidewalks, every sound this town made. But tonight, there was something different in the air, a quiet expectancy. They turned the corner, and the light shifted. Shadows stretched longer across the pavement, the glow of the sun catching dust as it hung suspended. It was then that Daniel noticed a figure ahead, hunched near the bus stop. He didn't pay much attention at first. Maple Creek had its share of drifters. But Lily slowed, tugging at his arm, her curious gaze already fixed. The man sat on the ground, back against a lamppost, clothes faded to colorless rags. His beard was gray and wild, eyes darting with a restless hunger. And beside him, something that made Daniel's steps falter, a dog, but not just any dog. The German Shepherd lay tethered by a fraying rope, its body thin, ribs showing like ridges beneath dull fur. One ear hung broken, bent as if it had never healed. Scars crisscrossed its frame, and its hind leg trembled when it tried to shift. Yet, the eyes, deep brown, glazed with pain, but still holding a flicker of life. Leaning against the man's knee was a battered piece of cardboard scrawled with 4 words, $5 for the beast. Lily gasped. Her hand tightened around Daniel's fingers. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Look at him." The street, the town, the warm evening, they all seemed to fade in that moment. For Daniel, time slowed. Those eyes, scarred yet unbroken, met his own, and though he didn't know it yet, his life had just crossed a threshold. The lamppost cast a long shadow across the cracked pavement, stretching like a silent witness to the small tableau at its base. Calvin Moore sat slouched against the metal pole, his back bowed as if the years had carved a permanent bend into him. His shirt, once plaid, hung open at the collar, stained dark with sweat and age. His jeans were torn at both knees, boots worn down to the thin leather soles. He clutched a cardboard sign in crooked fingers, letters scrawled in thick black marker, uneven and cruel. $5 for the beast. At his side lay the German shepherd. The animal was a ruin of what it once must have been. Its fur, once the proud sable coat of its breed, was dulled by filth, mottled with grey, and patchy where scars had claimed the skin. The ribs rose sharply beneath the coat, each breath shallow, as if the very act of surviving demanded too much. One ear bent downward, broken and healed in the wrong direction. A back leg trembled whenever it tried to adjust its weight, the faint memory of an old fracture haunting every move. And still, the eyes. They were what stopped Lily in her tracks. Large, deep brown, glassy with pain, but carrying a flicker that refused to die out. It was that flicker that pierced her small heart, that made her clutch her father's hand so tightly he felt the press of her nails. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice quivering like a violin string. "Look at him. Please." Daniel's gaze fell fully on the dog then. He'd seen animals neglected before, on farms, in backyards, sometimes even at the edge of crime scenes. But this, there was something different. A quiet dignity lingered in the shepherd, even in its collapse. Not wild, not broken beyond hope. Waiting. He forced himself to look away, to the man holding the sign. Calvin's eyes darted quickly, suspicious, glinting with something both sly and desperate. He had the smell of whiskey about him, mixed with sweat and street dust. $5, officer," Calvin said, his voice gravelly, teeth yellowed beneath his grin. "That's all it takes. You want him, he's yours. Ain't worth more than that anyway." The casual cruelty in his tone made Daniel's jaw tighten. He hated the way Calvin spoke of the dog, as though life could be weighed and measured like junk at a pawn shop. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Lily had crouched down, her sundress brushing against the warm concrete. The shepherd lifted its head weakly at her movement. Their eyes met. For a moment, the whole town vanished. The honking cars, the murmur of voices from the diner across the street, even the fading hum of the summer cicadas. In that gaze, Lily saw not an animal, not a beast, but a soul crying for mercy. Her lips trembled. "Daddy," she said again, louder this time, "we can't leave him here. He needs us." Daniel's instinct bristled. He took a step closer, his shadow falling across both Lily and the dog. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "we don't know him. He could be dangerous, and we've got enough to handle at home already." His voice was calm, practical, the voice of a man who had spent too many years weighing risks against responsibilities. But Lily shook her head, her small hand reaching out cautiously, not quite touching the shepherd, but close enough for the dog's nose to twitch toward her fingers. "He's not dangerous," she insisted, her grey eyes, so like his own, filling with tears. "He's just hurt. Can't you see?" Daniel looked again, really looked, and the ache that had been buried deep inside him stirred. He saw the scars across the dog's neck, the limp, the bruised pride in its posture. He saw something else too, the same ache he carried when he thought of all the people he hadn't been able to save. Calvin chuckled, low and sharp. "Kids see things funny, don't they?" That mutt's no good. $5, officer, and I'll be out of your hair. Daniel turned on him. Where'd you get him? Calvin's grin faltered, then returned, thinner this time. Does it matter? Stray? Useless? Just a mouth I can't feed. He lifted the sign a little higher. You buying or not? Lily's hand tugged desperately at Daniel's sleeve. Daddy, please. Her voice cracked, and Daniel froze. Lily rarely begged. She had learned early not to ask for more than he could give. She was the kind of child who carried her own small burdens silently, trying not to trouble him. For her to plead now, to let her voice tremble with urgency, he couldn't ignore it. He stared at Calvin, then at the dog. The shepherd blinked slowly, chest rising and falling with effort. And in its eyes, Daniel thought he saw something more than pain. Recognition. A sigh escaped him, heavy, reluctant, but final. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. His fingers hesitated over the bills. $5 was nothing, but the weight of responsibility behind it was everything. He had no room in his life for complications, and yet walking away felt unthinkable. He pulled out the bill and held it out. Calvin snatched it greedily, shoving it into his pocket. Pleasure doing business. Without another word, he swung his backpack over his shoulder and shuffled quickly down the street, disappearing into the crowd with surprising speed, as if afraid to linger near what he had just sold. Daniel frowned, unsettled. People usually haggled, lingered. Calvin had bolted the moment the money touched his hand. But Lily didn't notice. She had already turned back to the shepherd, her small palms brushing gently against the dog's fur. You're safe now, she whispered, her voice breaking with tenderness. We'll take care of you. The shepherd let out a faint sound, half sigh, half whimper, and for the first time, its tail moved, a fragile, almost imperceptible wag. Daniel crouched beside them, his hand brushing across the dog's head. The fur was coarse, matted, but beneath it he felt the faint tremor of life, steady and waiting. What should we call him? Lily asked, looking up at him with hope shining through her tears. Daniel studied the shepherd, the scars, the limp, the posture that still held a trace of training. Shadow, he said quietly, almost to himself. He looks like he's walked through too many shadows already. Lily smiled, hugging the dog carefully. Shadow, that's perfect. And as the last light of day dipped behind Maple Creek's rooftops, Daniel felt a shift deep inside him. A choice had been made, not just for Lily, not just for the dog, but for himself. He didn't know it yet, but the $5 he had just handed over had bought him far more than a broken shepherd. It had bought him a new beginning. The crumpled bill left Daniel's hand, and with it, something inside him shifted. Calvin Moore's grimy fingers snatched the money so quickly it was as though he feared Daniel might change his mind. Without another word, the man shoved the cardboard sign under his arm, swung his backpack over one shoulder, and shuffled down the sidewalk. His gait was hurried, almost desperate, his figure swallowed by the crowd within seconds. Daniel's brows furrowed. Most drifters lingered, maybe tried to haggle or offer a half-hearted blessing, but Calvin vanished like a man eager to distance himself from what he had just discarded. The speed unsettled Daniel, planting a seed of suspicion he couldn't shake. But Lily didn't notice. Her whole world had narrowed to the creature lying on the concrete. She had slipped down onto her knees, her little hands trembling as they brushed across the shepherd's patchy fur. "It's okay now," she whispered, her voice so soft it trembled against the evening air. "You're safe. We'll take care of you." The dog stirred faintly, eyes blinking open as if trying to decide whether this was another cruelty or the beginning of something different. When Lily's hand rested lightly against his neck, his chest rose in a shuddering breath. A faint sound escaped him, not quite a whimper, not quite a sigh. The frail tail wagged once, twice, before stilling again. Daniel crouched beside them. He had told himself this was foolish, another mouth to feed, another burden in a life already stretched thin. But as he knelt, he saw what his daughter saw. Not a beast, but a survivor. Scars mapped across the shepherd's body like a cruel history. Thin white lines along the ribs, patches of missing fur near the flank, a deep groove circling the neck where a chain had once bit into flesh. The right hind leg bore the uneven rhythm of a bone broken long ago and left to heal without care. Yet, beneath all that ruin, there was something unmistakable in the dog's posture. Even lying half-starved on the sidewalk, its body carried the echo of discipline. The way the head lifted, ears twitching, despite one broken, eyes sharp even through pain. It was the way trained dogs moved, alert, controlled, as if waiting for a command that would never come. "You've seen too much, haven't you?" Daniel murmured, his hand resting gently on the shepherd's head. The fur was coarse under his palm, but the warmth beneath it was steady, alive. Lily looked up at him, her grey eyes wide and wet. "What's his name, Daddy?" Daniel hesitated. Names mattered. They were more than labels. They were promises. He studied the dog again, the shadows that clung to him, the battles etched into his frame, the silent endurance in his gaze. "Shadow," he said at last, his voice low but certain. "He looks like he's walked through too many shadows already." And he came out the other side. Lily's face lit up, brighter than the street lamps flickering to life above them. She leaned closer, wrapping her thin arms gently around the shepherd's neck. "Shadow," she repeated, almost like a prayer. "That's perfect. Your shadow now. And you're ours." The dog didn't resist. He lay still, head resting against her shoulder, eyes closing briefly as if surrendering to her small embrace. Daniel watched, a lump rising in his throat. For years, he had armored himself against feeling too deeply. The job demanded it, and the divorce had only sharpened the walls around his heart. Yet in this moment, seeing his daughter cradle a broken dog as if she'd been waiting her whole life for him, something inside cracked open. A breeze swept down Main Street, carrying the scent of fried onions from the diner and the distant sound of a train rolling along its tracks. People passed by, sparing curious glances, but saying nothing. To them, it was just a stray dog, another burden in a world already heavy with too many. But Daniel knew better. He felt it in the marrow of his bones. This was not chance. This was the beginning of something larger than either of them understood. "All right," he said finally, his voice softer than he intended. "Let's get him home." Lily's head snapped up, joy flooding her features. "Really?" "Really." He tried to sound gruff, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "But he's your responsibility. You hear me? Food, water, care. He'll need a lot." She nodded furiously, already wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I promise, Daddy. I'll take care of him. I'll do everything." Daniel slipped his arms carefully beneath Shadow's body. The shepherd was lighter than he expected, too light for a dog his size, and the hollowness of it made Daniel's chest ache. The dog groaned faintly, but did not fight, settling against him with a resigned heaviness. Lily followed close as they crossed the street, her small hand gripping the hem of her father's shirt, eyes fixed on Shadow, as if afraid he might vanish if she looked away. The sidewalks of Maple Creek stretched before them, bathed now in the orange glow of dusk. Somewhere a bell rang from the old church, the sound carrying across the rooftops like a benediction. Daniel shifted the shepherd's weight in his arms and glanced down at his daughter. She was smiling, wide and unguarded, her ribbon catching the last streak of light. He hadn't seen her smile like that in months, pure, unshadowed by loss or fear. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something stir in himself too. Not just duty, not just responsibility, hope. He looked at the dog cradled against him, scarred, broken, but alive. "Welcome home, Shadow," he murmured. The shepherd's ear twitched, and though his eyes stayed closed, Daniel could swear he felt the faintest press of trust beneath his touch. He tightened his hold and kept walking, unaware that the decision he had just made, for $5 crumpled at a street corner, would set into motion a chain of events that would change everything. For him, for his daughter, and for the broken animal who was no longer just a beast, but family. The screen door creaked as Daniel pushed it open with his shoulder, the weight of the shepherd heavy in his arms. The cool air of the modest Hayes home met the fading warmth of evening, carrying with it the scent of pine cleaner and the faint vanilla of Lily's crayons left scattered on the kitchen table. Lily darted in ahead, flicking on the light. Her small sneakers squeaked against the linoleum, her braid bouncing as she spun to watch her father lay the dog down gently on a folded quilt near the wall. Shadow's paws stretched stiffly as they touched the floor, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. His eyes opened halfway, scanning the room as if cataloging every sound, every scent. Even in weakness, the discipline clung to him. The steady way his ears shifted, the quiet patience of an animal trained to endure. "Daddy, he looks so tired," Lily whispered, crouching low. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, a habit when nerves pulled at him. He had dealt with suspects twice his size, walked into homes where danger sat waiting in every corner, but bringing a wounded, unknown dog into his living room somehow unsettled him more. He kept his voice firm. "Don't get too close yet, Lily. Let him settle." She nodded, but her eyes never left Shadow. Her fingers twitched, as though they longed to stroke his fur. Daniel could see it, her compassion overflowing, tugging against the caution he tried to teach her. He stood in silence, watching the shepherd. The scars on the dog's neck looked even harsher under the soft lamplight, and the tremor in his hind leg spoke of pain that ran deep. And a part of him wanted to call a vet immediately, to demand answers, to put order into this chaos. But another part of him, the weary part, the one that had carried loneliness like a second skin for years, recognized something in those eyes. Shadow blinked slowly, his gaze drifting to Lily. She inched forward, not touching, just sitting cross-legged a few feet away. "You're home now," she whispered, her voice steady for the first time. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." The dog's ears twitched. Then, with a groan that seemed to echo from his bones, he lowered his head onto the quilt. His tail thumped once. Just once. But it was enough to make Lily smile. Daniel exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Later that evening, after Lily had showered and pulled on her pajamas, she hovered near the hallway, peeking back into the living room. "Can he sleep in my room?" she asked, hope shimmering in her tone. Daniel shook his head gently. "Not yet. He's still adjusting. We don't know how he'll react." She frowned, but didn't argue. Instead, She disappeared into her room. 10 minutes later, she reappeared with her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tight and a blanket folded over her arms. She tiptoed to the living room and placed the blanket beside Shadow, draping it carefully without touching his body. "In case you get cold," she whispered. From his seat at the kitchen table, Daniel watched quietly. His daughter's compassion was a mirror of his late mother's, gentle, unwavering, often stubborn in its kindness. He rubbed his temple, the ghost of old memories pressing against him. He had wanted to protect Lily from more pain, from more loss. And here she was, offering her heart to a scarred animal that might not survive the week. Yet, even as he worried, he couldn't bring himself to stop her. The night deepened. The house fell into its usual hush, the refrigerator's low hum, the clock ticking above the sink. Daniel made his rounds, locking the doors and windows, checking that the porch light was on. When he passed Lily's room, he paused. The door was ajar, and through the narrow gap he saw her curled beneath her quilt, one arm dangling toward the floor where her stuffed rabbit lay abandoned. And outside her door, lying on the rug with his head resting against the frame, was Shadow. Daniel froze, hand tightening on the doorknob. The shepherd hadn't been guided there, hadn't been coaxed. He had chosen his post, like a soldier taking a watch. His body curled in a protective arc, ears half alert, even in exhaustion. A strange warmth spread through Daniel's chest. This wasn't chance. This wasn't random. Somewhere in the depths of this dog's battered body, instincts of loyalty remained unbroken. He stepped back quietly, leaving them as they were. In the living room, he sank into the couch, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he felt the house wasn't empty. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was shared. He closed his eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of Shadow's breathing down the hall. Maybe, just maybe, bringing the dog home hadn't been a mistake. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the man and the shepherd, both scarred, both weary, kept watch in their own way. One guarded with his body, the other with his heart, and between them lay a little girl's faith that sometimes the broken things were the ones most worth saving. Morning light spilled across the Hayes' backyard, soft and golden, painting the grass with dew that glittered like tiny shards of glass. The air smelled of earth and cut hay drifting in from the neighboring field. Daniel stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching as Lily bustled about with an oversized t-shirt hanging past her knees, hair pulled into lopsided pigtails. At her feet sat a blue plastic bucket filled with lukewarm water, bubbles foaming at the surface. Beside it lay an old bottle of dog shampoo Daniel had dug out from the hall closet, left over from years ago when his late wife had briefly tried fostering strays. Lily crouched by the bucket, holding a brush in one hand and a towel in the other, her small frame radiating determination. Shadow lay nearby, stretched out on the porch boards, his ribs faintly visible with every rise and fall of his chest. His eyes were open, calm, but there was a watchfulness in them, as though he were measuring whether this new life was one he could trust. "Come on, Shadow," Lily coaxed, patting the edge of the bucket, as if it were a throne prepared just for him. "It's bath day. You'll feel so much better." Daniel chuckled softly, leaning on the porch post. "Good luck, kiddo. Some dogs hate baths more than thunderstorms." But Shadow didn't resist. When Lily touched his side gently, he heaved himself up, limping closer, then settled again beside the bucket. His trust, fragile though it was, seemed to rest squarely in her small hands. Kneeling beside him, Lily began to work the shampoo into his coat. The suds spread white against the dull brown and black of his fur. Dirt streaked away, leaving patches of cleaner skin. She hummed as she worked, a little tune she'd made up, off-key but sweet, filling the yard like sunlight. Then her humming faltered. "Daddy," she whispered. "Come look." Daniel set his mug aside and crouched beside her. She had parted the fur along Shadow's neck, and beneath the foam, a ring of bare, scarred flesh circled like a ghostly collar. The skin was rough, thickened, the mark of something once biting deep. Lily's hand hovered above it. What is that?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen it before, too many times, in alley dogs and seized evidence from neglect cases. His voice was low, steady, but there was a heaviness to it. "That's from a chain. Too tight. For too long." Her eyes glistened. "Who could hurt him like that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, his hand brushed down Shadow's side, feeling the ridges of ribs sharper than they should be, then further along where old scars crossed like faded road maps of pain. One rib jutted oddly, the result of a fracture that had never been set. The hind leg told its own story. A bone broken, left to heal wrong, giving him that permanent limp. Daniel exhaled slowly, fighting down the anger that burned in his chest. Some people shouldn't be allowed near animals, that's all. Lily shook her head fiercely, tears dripping onto Shadow's fur. "It's not fair. He didn't do anything wrong." Shadow shifted slightly, nudging his nose into her palm. He licked at her fingers once, a small gesture that made her tears fall faster. She bent her head, pressing her cheek against his wet fur. "I'll never let anyone hurt you again," she whispered. Daniel looked away toward the horizon, the sun climbing higher, the town waking up in the distance. He had seen cruelty in human beings, on the streets, in homes, in quiet backyards where neighbors finally called when it was too late. And yet, standing there watching his daughter cradle this scarred animal, as if he were the most precious thing she'd ever known, he felt both fury at the unseen past and a fragile hope for the future. "Let's finish cleaning him up," he said gently, his voice hoarse. "He deserves better than the life he had." Together, they worked in silence. Lily scrubbed carefully, pausing whenever she uncovered another scar. Daniel steadied Shadow's head, keeping water from dripping into his eyes. As the dirt washed away, the shepherd's true coat began to emerge. A mixture of sable and black, dulled but still noble, as though beneath all the grime and wounds, the essence of what he was had never been erased. By the time the last bucket of water had been poured, Shadow looked transformed, if only on the surface. He shook himself, sending droplets flying, and then stood, taller now, his fur clinging damp to his frame. The scars were more visible, yes, but so was his strength. He wasn't just a battered stray. He was a survivor. Lily wrapped the towel around him, giggling when he sneezed and shook again. Her laughter rang out, pure and unguarded, breaking the heaviness that had hung in the air moments before. Shadow's tail wagged faintly, a rhythm that seemed to follow her joy. Daniel stood back, watching them. His daughter and this scarred dog, both carrying wounds, both choosing to keep going. And in that simple, messy backyard, he felt something shift in himself again. Maybe this wasn't just Lily saving a dog. Maybe this was the dog saving them too. The afternoon heat clung to Maple Creek like a heavy blanket. The Hayes backyard, usually quiet, carried the hum of cicadas and the occasional chirp of sparrows darting along the fence line. Lily sat cross-legged on the porch steps, drawing pictures of Shadow with her colored pencils. The shepherd lay nearby on the grass, his coat still slightly damp from the morning bath, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Daniel watched from a few feet away, arms crossed, leaning against the porch post. He tried to let his guard down, sipping slowly from a glass of water, telling himself this was what his daughter needed. peace, stability, the kind of simple afternoon that most kids took for granted. Then the quiet cracked. A low, guttural bark erupted from the other side of the fence, so deep it rattled in Daniel's chest. Rufus, the neighbor's mastiff. The sound was followed by the thud of heavy paws and a violent slam against the wooden boards. The fence shuddered as though struck by a hammer. Lily startled, her pencil scattering across the porch. "Daddy!" she cried, eyes wide. Before Daniel could move, Shadow was already up. The limp was there, but it didn't slow him. His body surged forward, placing himself squarely between Lily and the fence. His head lowered, ears forward, one broken but still straining, tail stiff, body motionless, except for the rise of his chest. Rufus snarled again, a flash of teeth through the slats, his massive frame pressing hard enough to rattle the boards. Spittle sprayed through the cracks. Another slam made the fence creak in protest. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood his ground. The silence of his defiance was louder than Rufus's fury. His eyes never wavered, fixed on the threat with a calm intensity. His body made a line, an invisible barrier drawn across the yard. Behind him, Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit against her chest, frozen but shielded. Daniel's pulse hammered as he stepped down from the porch. His first instinct had been to grab Lily, to pull her inside, but now his eyes were locked on the shepherd. There was something uncanny in the way Shadow held his stance. Not panicked, not reckless, calculated, like a soldier trained to protect. Rufus barked once more, the sound splitting the air, and then, suddenly, he stopped. Perhaps it was the unwavering stillness of the shepherd, or the silent authority in his posture. But the mastiff's growls dwindled. A final huff of frustration, and the neighbor's dog slinked back from the fence, nails scraping against dirt as he retreated into his own yard. The world fell quiet again. Shadow didn't move immediately. He waited, ears twitching, eyes scanning the fence until he was certain the threat had passed. Only then did his body relax slightly. He exhaled, lowered himself carefully onto the grass, and turned his head. Not toward Daniel, but toward Lily, as if checking she was unharmed. Lily let out a shaky breath, her voice trembling. He protected me." Daniel crouched beside Shadow, studying him. The dog's chest heaved slowly, his scars catching the sunlight. He ran a hand gently across Shadow's back, feeling the tense muscles begin to loosen under his palm. "Yeah," he murmured. He did. It wasn't just instinct, Daniel realized. This wasn't the erratic bravery of a stray, lashing out in fear. It was control, measured and precise. Shadow hadn't wasted energy on barking or lunging. He'd stood, silent and unflinching, until the danger passed. That was training. Daniel had worked alongside K-9 units during his years on the force. He remembered the way those dogs carried themselves, alert, disciplined, protective. He saw the same bearing now in Shadow, even through the limp, even through the years of neglect. This wasn't just a stray they'd pulled off the street for $5. This was a dog who had once belonged to something greater. Lily knelt beside Shadow, wrapping her arms carefully around his neck. "You're my hero," she whispered into his fur. "I knew you weren't just a dog. You're special." Shadow's tail wagged faintly, his head nudging against her shoulder with quiet acceptance. Daniel straightened slowly, his gaze lingering on the fence. Rufus's barks had always been a nuisance, but today they had revealed something far more important. Shadow wasn't just surviving. He was remembering. The instincts hadn't left him. They'd simply been buried beneath scars and hunger, waiting for the moment to surface again. As the sun dipped lower, Daniel felt a weight settle in his chest. Not the familiar burden of loneliness, but something new. Responsibility. He looked at Lily, her cheek pressed against Shadow's scarred coat, her eyes closed in trust. And he looked at the shepherd, battered but resolute, his body curved protectively around her small frame. This wasn't a chance. This wasn't a coincidence. Daniel Hayes had not just bought a broken dog for $5 on a street corner. He had brought home a survivor, a guardian. And in that moment, watching his daughter safe in the shelter of Shadow's quiet strength, Daniel realized the truth. This was no ordinary stray. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the night lay heavy over Maple Creek, a veil of mist rolling off the river and seeping into the streets like breath from some unseen mouth. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch, still in his t-shirt and jeans, a half-finished glass of water resting on the coffee table beside him. The television had long since gone dark, leaving only the faint glow of the porch light spilling in through the curtains. He stirred once, pulling the throw blanket higher over his chest, and drifted deeper into the kind of restless sleep that never fully soothed him. Then came the sound. At first, he thought it was part of a dream, a scratching noise, distant, persistent. But it grew sharper, paired with a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards. His eyes snapped open. Shadow. Daniel sat up quickly, the air cool against his skin, and listened. The growl came again, deep, rolling out of the shepherd's chest like thunder on the horizon. He followed the sound into the kitchen, where he found Shadow pacing in tight circles near the back door. The dog's tail was stiff, ears pricked, body tense as if every muscle had been drawn taut by some invisible string. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered, crouching low. Shadow ignored him. His eyes, dark and gleaming in the faint porch light, were locked on something beyond the glass door. Another growl rumbled, more urgent this time, as he pressed his nose against the crack where the frame met the floor. The sound was primal, protective. Daniel reached for the switch, bathing the backyard in yellow light, but there was nothing. Just grass, slick with dew, and the outline of the maple tree swaying in the mist. No movement. No intruder. But Shadow's instincts didn't lie. Daniel had seen enough in his years as an officer to know that when a dog sensed something, you paid attention. The shepherd pawed at the door, once, twice, then turned and looked at him with such intensity that Daniel felt the breath catch in his chest. This wasn't agitation. It was direction. "You want me to follow you," Daniel muttered. Shadow let out a short, sharp bark, then turned back toward the door, muscles vibrating with the need to move. Daniel hesitated. Lily was asleep upstairs, curled under her quilt, her breathing soft and even. He glanced at the stairs, then back at the dog. Something in Shadow's urgency made the decision for him. He grabbed his jacket, slid the flashlight from the counter, and eased the door open. The night air rushed in, damp and cold. Shadow pushed forward immediately, slipping into the darkness with surprising speed for his limp. Daniel followed, boots crunching softly on the gravel path that led past the side of the house. The shepherd didn't wander. He moved with purpose, head low, nose to the ground, weaving through the mist like he was following a trail only he could see. Each time Daniel's beam of light caught him, Shadow would pause, glance back to make sure he was still coming, then press forward again. They left the neat rows of houses behind, the manicured lawns giving way to cracked sidewalks and empty lots. The mist thickened, swallowing the street lamps one by one, until only Daniel's flashlight carved a narrow tunnel of visibility. "Where are you taking me?" Daniel whispered under his breath. Shadow's ears twitched, but he didn't slow. He led Daniel past the old railroad crossing, its wooden planks slick with dew, then down a side street that Daniel hadn't walked in years. The silence of the town was heavy here. No cars, no voices, just the distant drip of water from broken gutters and the occasional scurry of something small in the dark. Finally, Shadow stopped. They stood before a chain-link fence, sagging under years of rust and neglect. Behind it loomed a warehouse, its corrugated metal walls streaked with black stains, windows cracked or missing entirely. The structure leaned slightly, as though bowed under the weight of its own forgotten history. Daniel's stomach tightened. He remembered this place. Lot 14, or maybe Lot 16. It had once been a shipping depot back when Maple Creek still bustled with industry. Now it was just another skeleton left to rot on the edge of town. Shadow pressed his nose to a gap in the fence, whining softly this time, the growl replaced by something almost mournful. "You've been here before," Daniel murmured. He didn't know why he said it, only that it felt true. The shepherd looked back at him, eyes glinting in the beam of the flashlight. There was no fear in them, only insistence. Daniel crouched, pushed aside the loose edge of the fence, and slipped through. Shadow followed immediately, his body tense, tail low but steady. Inside the perimeter, the air was thicker, carrying the sour smell of rust and something fouler. Stale urine, rot, the lingering stench of life once crammed into too small a space. Daniel lifted the flashlight higher, its beam cutting across the cracked concrete and the weeds pushing stubbornly through the floor. Shadow padded ahead, pausing at the crooked side door of the warehouse. His body stiffened, nose pressed to the crack. A low whine escaped his throat, followed by a sharp guttural bark that echoed off the metal walls. Daniel's pulse raced. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and exhaled slowly. "All right," he whispered. "Let's see what you want me to find." He pushed the door open. The hinges shrieked in protest, the sound bouncing through the cavernous space inside. The beam of light revealed dust swirling in the air like ash. The floor was littered with debris, broken pallets, shattered glass, scraps of metal. But further in, against the far wall, something made Daniel freeze. Rows of kennels. Some stood upright, others collapsed into twisted heaps. Rust ate at their frames, the bars bent and broken. The air smelled stronger here, acrid and sour. Daniel moved closer, the beam of his flashlight trembling slightly as it passed over scratch marks gouged deep into the concrete beneath one of the cages. Shadow growled again, stepping forward until his body pressed against Daniel's leg, as if to remind him they weren't alone in this. Daniel swallowed hard, bile rising in his throat. He had seen cruelty before, but something about the silence in this place, the way the kennels stood like monuments to suffering, made his skin crawl. And in that silence, a thought pressed against his mind. This wasn't a coincidence. Shadow hadn't just led him here on instinct. He remembered. Whatever had broken this dog's body had roots in this very place. The echo of the door's creak still hung in the air as Daniel stepped inside, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the gloom. Dust motes swirled in the light, thick and stubborn, like ghosts reluctant to leave. His boots crunched against the litter-strewn floor, splinters of wood, shards of glass, scraps of twisted metal. Shadow followed, his paws making barely a sound. But the shepherd's body trembled, almost imperceptibly. His ears twitched at every echo, his nostrils flaring as though he were sifting through the scent of memories buried in the walls. Daniel slowed, his chest tightening. The warehouse was massive, its cavernous belly stretching into darkness. But what held his eyes was the line of cages against the far wall. They stood in rows, some stacked like filing cabinets, others collapsed in heaps as if discarded. The metal was rusted, eaten through by time, but the shapes remained unmistakable. Kennels, dozens of them. The smell here was sharper, sour with the tang of urine and decay, clinging to the air long after the lives inside had gone. Daniel's flashlight beam landed on one cage, whose bars were bent outward. Along the concrete beneath it were deep scratches, claw marks carved into the floor, desperate and uneven. He crouched down, tracing the gouges with his fingers, and felt the sting in his chest. These weren't just cages. They were prisons. Behind him, Shadow let out a low whine, the sound so raw it pierced through Daniel's composure. The shepherd pressed close, his shoulder brushing against Daniel's arm. His body trembled harder now, his breath coming fast. "You've been here," Daniel whispered, his throat dry. Shadow didn't respond, but his eyes, dark, haunted, stayed locked on the cages. Then, with sudden urgency, he moved ahead, limping but determined, his nose leading him deeper into the warehouse. Daniel followed, his pulse loud in his ears. He swung the flashlight across the rows and caught glimpses that turned his stomach. A faded leather collar lying inside one kennel, the tag long gone, but the holes worn thin by years of pulling. A chewed nylon leash curled like a snake in the corner. A torn blanket stiff with old stains, its edges frayed. Each artifact was a whisper of suffering, a fragment of a story too cruel to tell aloud. Shadow stopped suddenly at a cluster of cages stacked too high. He pawed at the bottom one, then backed away, whining again, his body quaking. Daniel crouched and shone the light inside. There, in the filth, lay a dog tag. He reached for it with gloved fingers and lifted it into the beam. The name stamped into the metal was almost illegible beneath the rust, but he could just make it out. Juno. Daniel's hand tightened around it. Juno. Someone had named this dog once. Someone had cared enough to engrave a tag. And yet here it lay. Abandoned in a cage no one had cleaned in years. Shadow barked once, sharp and startling, pulling Daniel further in. They moved past another row, where a filing cabinet stood half-buried under fallen crates. The drawers were crooked, but one remained shut, a padlock hanging broken. Daniel pulled it open. Dust billowed into his face, but inside lay stacks of papers, logbooks, bound with rubber bands, brittle from age. He picked one up, thumbing through the yellowed pages. Columns of numbers and codes filled the lines. Unit X14, 3 delivered. Lot 22, hold for pickup. B-batch, $250 each. His stomach turned. These weren't records of strays. These were transactions. Daniel shoved the logbook into his jacket, then pulled out his phone and began snapping photos. The cages, the collars, the scratched floors, the coded pages. Every detail mattered. This wasn't just cruelty. It was organized. Shadow growled again, this time lower, more guttural. He stood by a stack of crates in the corner, his body rigid, nose pressed against the wood. His ears twitched, his eyes darting to Daniel with insistence. Daniel approached slowly, lifting the flashlight. The crates had been arranged like a wall, concealing a smaller space behind. He pushed one aside, and the beam spilled into a hidden alcove. There, half covered by a tarp, was a cage on wheels. Larger than the rest, its bars were thicker, its lock heavier. Daniel's throat tightened as the smell hit him, rot, unmistakable and suffocating. He forced himself closer, peeling back the top. Inside lay nothing but a torn nylon harness and an empty bowl, but the stains on the floor told their own story. Shadow whimpered, pressing his body against Daniel's leg, as if both seeking comfort and offering it. Daniel's jaw clenched. "They did this to you, didn't they?" he murmured, looking down at the shepherd. The dog didn't answer, of course, but his trembling stilled for a moment, his eyes meeting Daniel's in the beam of light. It was as though he was saying, "Now you know." Daniel swallowed hard, bile rising, guilt gnawing at him. He remembered whispers from 2 years back, complaints about strange vans, howls echoing in the night, rumors of dogs disappearing. He had dismissed them, telling himself they were ghost stories in a town too small for big crime. And yet here it was, laid bare in rust and scars. He knelt in the dirt and pressed a hand to Shadow's back. "I should have seen this sooner," he whispered. "I should have stopped it." Shadow leaned into him, silent but steady, his warmth anchoring Daniel against the storm inside. The warehouse loomed around them, filled with echoes of suffering. But in that moment, Daniel understood something vital. This shepherd hadn't led him here by accident. He had carried the memory of this place in his scars, in his bones, waiting for someone willing to listen. And now that someone was Daniel, the silence inside the warehouse pressed in like a weight. Even the night insects had gone still, as if nature itself refused to intrude on the place. Dust hung heavy in the air, swirling each time Daniel shifted, each step echoing across the hollow concrete floor. He raised his phone again, the flash cutting through the gloom. One by one, he photographed the cages, the rusted bars, the claw marks gouged into the floor, the collars abandoned like gravestones. Each picture felt like a confession collected too late. He moved to the filing cabinet. Pages of numbers and codes spilled from the drawers like entrails. He smoothed one against his knee, the ink faded but legible. Unit X14, 5 delivered. Lot 9, 2 pending pickup. B batch, $175 each. The entries were written with the cold detachment of invoices, reducing lives to tallies to product. He snapped photo after photo, the phone's memory filling with evidence he hadn't expected to find. Behind him, Shadow stood rigid, his dark eyes locked on the rows of kennels. The shepherd's body trembled faintly, his breath shallow, but he didn't move away. It was as though he needed Daniel to see, to witness. Daniel lowered the paper, staring at the faded lines of ink. X14, he whispered. The code clawed at the back of his mind. He'd heard it before. A memory surfaced, unbidden. 2 years ago, a woman had reported strange vans parked by the quarry late at night, their doors echoing with muffled whines. Around the same time, a boy had told officers he found collars and broken chains in the woods. The cases never stuck. No witnesses, no clear crime scene. The department had been short on staff, stretched thin. He had dismissed it. At the time, Daniel had told himself it was nothing but rumor. The kind of paranoia small towns love to spin into ghost stories. He remembered laughing it off with his captain. Dog smuggling in Maple Creek, not worth the hours. Now the weight of that decision pressed against his ribs like iron. He had let it go, and maybe, just maybe, if he hadn't, Bruno, Juno, whoever else had been trapped in these cages, wouldn't have lived through hell. He exhaled slowly, his throat tight. The guilt was sharp, but it wasn't just guilt. It was my responsibility. This wasn't random cruelty. This was an operation, systematic and deliberate, that had thrived in the shadows while he'd been looking elsewhere. Shadow padded closer, his nails clicking against the concrete. He pressed his body lightly against Daniel's leg, as if anchoring him to the present. Daniel knelt, brushing his fingers gently across the shepherd's scarred head. The fur was coarse, broken in places, but beneath it pulsed steady life. "You knew," he whispered. "You carried this all along." Shadow's eyes met his deep pools, glinting in the narrow beam of the flashlight. There was something unspoken in them, something beyond instinct, not just survival, but memory. The dog hadn't stumbled here by chance. He had led Daniel back to the truth. The camera flash lit the room again, capturing another logbook, another tag, another scar etched into the walls. Each picture felt like a small piece of justice waiting to be unearthed. But the deeper he looked, the more the anger stirred beneath the guilt. These cages weren't old accidents. They were deliberate, built, used, abandoned. And the logbooks proved someone had profited. He took a final photo of the cage on wheels, its heavy bars scarred and stained. Shadow growled softly, nose pressed against the metal, as if the memory still lingered in the steel itself. Daniel slipped the phone into his jacket pocket, then crouched low, resting his hand firmly on the shepherd's side. "You're not just a stray, are you?" he said softly. "You're a witness, a survivor, and maybe you're the key." For a long moment, neither moved. The warehouse seemed to breathe around them, the air dense with sorrow and old echoes. Daniel's chest rose and fell, heavy with realization. Shadow leaned closer, the tremor in his body slowly fading, as if comforted by the weight of Daniel's touch. When they finally turned back toward the crooked door, Daniel knew one thing for certain. This dog wasn't just part of his family now. He was part of an investigation, part of something bigger, darker, and necessary. As they stepped into the night, mist curling like smoke around their legs, Daniel glanced once more over his shoulder at the cages. He felt the old ache of regret coil in his chest, but also the faint spark of something else, determination. Shadow had brought him here for a reason, and Daniel Hayes wasn't going to walk away again. The morning sun broke softly over Maple Creek, spilling gold across the rooftops and catching on the rippling water of the river. The town stirred awake slowly, the hum of traffic light, the bakery windows fogging with the first loaves of bread. In the Hayes home, Lily had finished her cereal and sat fidgeting with her sneakers, her eyes drifting toward the door. Shadow lay stretched out on the rug, his scarred body rising and falling in steady rhythm, the limp in his leg less pronounced after a few days of rest. Daniel, coffee mug in hand, studied a stack of papers at the table, though his attention kept slipping back to the dog. He still couldn't shake the memory of the warehouse, of the cages that had turned his stomach, of the quiet persistence that had led them there. Lily, however, had the restless energy of a child too curious for her own good. She slipped her sketchbook into her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and tugged the door open before Daniel could ask where she was going. "I'll stay close," she called, the screen door slamming gently behind her. Daniel sighed, half tempted to chase after her, but the weight of paperwork and responsibility held him in place. Shadow stirred, one ear twitching as if deciding whether to follow, but the shepherd lowered his head again, content for the moment. Lily walked down the cracked sidewalk, humming softly, her blonde ponytail bouncing. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, the river swollen from last night's rain. She turned down a side path, past the overgrown lot where wildflowers fought for space, until she reached the narrow bridge that arched over a shallow creek. It was there she heard it, a faint, pitiful whimper carried on the breeze. She froze, her heart thudding. The sound came again, softer this time, from beneath the bridge. Lily crouched, peering through the weeds that lined the embankment. Her breath caught. Curled in the shadows was a puppy. Its fur was patchy, brown and tan, mottled with grime, ribs jutting out beneath the skin. One eye was swollen shut, crusted with infection, and its tiny body trembled as if the morning chills seeped straight into its bones. The whimper came again, fragile and desperate, barely louder than a sigh. "Oh," Lily whispered, her throat tightening. She slid down the embankment carefully, the mud damp against her sneakers. The puppy tried to shrink back, pressing itself into the corner where stone met earth, but it didn't have the strength to move far, its tail tucked tight under its belly. "Hey, it's okay," Lily murmured, her voice soft, the way she spoke to Shadow when nightmares still lingered in his sleep. "I won't hurt you." She shrugged off her backpack and pulled out the light jacket she'd carried. Slowly, carefully, she draped it around the puppy, scooping its frail body into her arms. The pup whimpered once, then sagged against her chest, too exhausted to resist. "You're safe now," she promised, hugging it gently. "I'm going to take care of you." By the time she climbed back up the embankment, her sneakers were soaked, her hands muddy. But she didn't care. She cradled the bundle tightly all the way home, whispering little comforts, as though the words themselves might stitch the broken creature back together. When she burst through the front door, Daniel nearly spilled his coffee. "Lily!" he exclaimed, standing so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "What on earth?" Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright and urgent. She held the jacket close, peeling it back just enough to reveal the tiny, trembling pup inside. "Look what I found," she said, her voice shaking with both excitement and sorrow. "He was all alone under the bridge. We can't leave him, Daddy. He won't make it." Daniel's first instinct was anger, born of fear. His voice came out sharp. "You went under the bridge by yourself? Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" Lily flinched, but her arms only tightened around the puppy. "I couldn't just walk away," she whispered. "You taught me better than that." The words struck him harder than a shout. Daniel's jaw clenched. He saw the determination in her grey eyes, his eyes, mirroring the same plea she had given him on the street corner when they'd first seen Shadow. He raked a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "Let me see him." Reluctantly, Lily stepped forward, offering the bundle. The puppy whimpered, its head lolling weakly against Daniel's palm. He felt the sharp ridge of ribs, the frailty of its heartbeat. His chest tightened. "God," he muttered. Shadow had risen now, limping over, ears forward. He sniffed the pup, then gave a soft nudge with his nose. The puppy flinched at first, but when Shadow settled beside him, calm and steady, the tiny creature relaxed a fraction, sighing into Lily's jacket. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "See, he trusts him already." Daniel looked from his daughter to the shepherd, then back down at the puppy. The reprimand on his tongue dissolved. He couldn't turn this life away any more than Lily could. "All right," he said at last, his voice low. "But you have to understand, we can't save every animal we find. This might be more than we can handle." Lily nodded quickly, hope flaring in her face. "We'll handle it. We'll do it together." Daniel sighed, defeated but not regretful. He reached for a clean towel and laid it gently on the couch. Lily placed the puppy down carefully, and Shadow settled nearby like a sentry, his scarred frame forming a silent barrier of protection. "What are we going to call him?" Lily asked softly. Daniel shook his head, almost smiling despite the heaviness in his chest. "You found him. You decide." She thought for a moment, then whispered, "Scout." Because he was out there all alone, trying to be brave. The puppy stirred faintly, as if answering to the name. Lily's smile widened through her tears. Daniel looked at her. His daughter, so full of compassion it scared him sometimes. And at the two dogs who now lay side by side, old and young, scarred and new. His heart ached, but it also swelled with something else. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel so empty. The first night with Scout was uneasy. The tiny pup whined faintly in his sleep, paws twitching as though chased by nightmares too large for his fragile body. Wrapped in Lily's old blanket, he nestled in the corner of the living room, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms. Shadow never left his side. The old shepherd lay stretched nearby, his scarred frame curved protectively around the small bundle. Every time Scout whimpered, Shadow would shift, nudging him gently with his nose, sometimes licking his ear with the soft patience of a guardian. Slowly, the pup's breathing steadied, his restless tremors easing under the weight of that quiet reassurance. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway, arms folded. He had expected conflict, territorial posturing, maybe a low growl from Shadow at having his space invaded. Instead, what he saw was something else entirely, a kind of instinct so deeply woven into the shepherd's being that even pain and scars couldn't erase it. Shadow was more than tolerant. He was teaching. The next morning, Lily bounded down the stairs, her hair a tumble of golden tangles. She skidded into the living room, eyes wide when she saw the scene before her. "They slept together," she whispered, grinning, clapping a hand over her mouth, as though she'd stumbled upon a secret too precious to say aloud. Shadow's ears flicked at the sound of her voice, and he lifted his head, watching her approach. Scout stirred, blinking bleary eyes, then gave a small, squeaky yawn. "Good morning, Scout," Lily cooed, dropping to her knees beside them. She scratched behind Shadow's bent ear, then rubbed the pup's belly. "You've got the best big brother in the whole world. You know that?" Scout's tail wagged faintly, thumping against the blanket. Shadow leaned forward, pressing his nose into Lily's hand, as though confirming the bond. The day unfolded gently. Daniel set up a shallow dish of water, which Scout approached hesitantly. He sniffed, looked back at Shadow, then dipped his tongue tentatively. Shadow gave a soft huff, as if approving the effort, and when Scout pulled back uncertainly, Shadow nudged him forward again with his muzzle. "See that?" Daniel murmured, watching from his chair. "He's showing him how to trust." Lily's eyes sparkled. "It's like he's teaching him everything, like family does." Through the afternoon, the pattern continued. When Scout tried to wander too far, Shadow rose slowly, his limp more pronounced in the summer heat, and guided him back with a gentle block of his chest. When the pup grew tired, Shadow lowered himself to the floor and let Scout curl against his side, the tiny body vanishing into the warmth of the older dog's fur. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, constant, deliberate, the kind of care only born from instinct and survival. At one point, Lily sat cross-legged beside them, her sketchbook open. She drew the three of them together, herself, Shadow, and Scout, all huddled close. She chewed on the end of her pencil, then wrote carefully across the top of the page, "My real family." Daniel, glancing over her shoulder, felt something twist inside his chest. He thought of his late wife, of the hollow years that had followed her absence, of the loneliness that had dug trenches into his heart. And now, this, his daughter, her small hands tracing love onto paper. The scarred shepherd, the fragile pup. Somehow, against all odds, They had begun to weave themselves into something whole. By evening, the house carried a different air. Where once it had felt quiet, almost empty, it now pulsed with the sounds of new life. Scout's tentative paws skittered against the floor. Lily's laughter bubbled as she coaxed him to chase a balled-up sock. And always, Shadow watched, eyes alert, posture calm, a sentinel disguised as a teacher. At dinner, Lily spoke softly, almost reverently. "Daddy, it feels like we're a real family now. Not just us. All of us." Daniel looked across the table at her face lit by the warm glow of the kitchen light. He followed her gaze to where Shadow lay near the doorway. Scout curled against his chest. The shepherd's eyes were half-lidded but alert, his ears twitching at every sound. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you're right." The words hung in the air, heavier than they seemed, because deep down, he knew this wasn't just about dogs. It was about healing, about finding pieces of themselves they hadn't realized were missing. Later that night, as Lily brushed her teeth and climbed into bed, she whispered through the crack of her door, "Good night, Shadow. Good night, Scout. Sweet dreams." Shadow rose slowly, padding down the hallway, his limp audible in the hush. He settled just outside her bedroom door, lowering himself with a soft groan. Scout trotted after him, clumsy but determined, circling twice before curling into the curve of Shadow's body. From his own room, Daniel stood in the dark, watching. The sight made his chest ache with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The house, once hollow, now carried the steady heartbeat of family. And it was Shadow, scarred, limping, broken to anyone else, who had made it possible. The night settled soft and heavy over Maple Creek, the air outside humming with the low chorus of crickets. A pale sliver of moonlight slipped through the blinds of Lily's bedroom, painting silver lines across her quilt. She was supposed to be asleep. Daniel had tucked her in an hour ago, kissed the top of her head, and whispered his usual promise: "I'll be right down the hall if you need me." But Lily's small voice hadn't quieted. She lay curled on her side, her stuffed rabbit clutched loosely in one hand. At the foot of her bed, Shadow lay stretched out, his head resting on his paws. Scout, already surrendered to puppy dreams, was nestled in a ball near Shadow's chest. The soft sound of their breathing filled the room like a lullaby. Lily turned slightly, her gaze falling on Shadow. She whispered barely louder than the rustle of sheets, "I miss her." The shepherd's ears twitched. His eyes opened, glinting in the thin strip of moonlight. He didn't move, not yet, but his focus was wholly on her. Lily clutched the rabbit tighter. "It's been so long since she left. Daddy says it's complicated, but I know what it means." Her voice broke on the edge of the word. "She didn't want us anymore." Her breath hitched. She swiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I try not to think about it, but it's like it's always right here." She pressed her palm flat over her chest, like it's carved inside. Shadow shifted slowly, his limp noticeable even in that small movement. He rose onto his elbows and crawled forward, pressing his nose gently against her hand. His warm breath puffed against her skin, steady, grounding. Lily let out a shaky laugh. "You understand, don't you? You know what it feels like when someone just throws you away." Her eyes brimmed, but she leaned closer, burying her face into his scarred fur. The scent of him, earthy, musky, faintly metallic, wasn't comforting in the way her stuffed toys were. It was real. Solid. He didn't pull away. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered into his coat. "You're my family now. You and Scout and Daddy. Even if she never comes back, we'll be okay, right?" Shadow huffed softly, his chest rising and falling like an answer. What Lily didn't know was that Daniel stood in the hallway, his hand resting against the doorframe, listening. He hadn't meant to. He'd only come up to check if she'd fallen asleep. But the sound of her voice, thin, breaking, had stopped him cold. Now he stood rooted, his chest tight, each word slicing deeper than the last. "Didn't want us anymore." The phrase rattled inside him like shrapnel. He pressed his fist against his mouth, his jaw clenching as he fought the swell of guilt. He wanted to storm in, to gather her in his arms, to tell her she was wrong, that her mother's leaving hadn't been her fault, hadn't been about love. But he didn't, because in that moment he saw something he couldn't replicate. Shadow's presence. The way the old shepherd absorbed Lily's heartbreak without judgment, without words, simply by staying. Daniel's arms could hold her, but Shadow's silence gave her the freedom to spill truths she never would have dared speak aloud to him. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had failed once in protecting her from abandonment. But maybe, just maybe, this scarred, broken dog was helping him protect her heart from the weight of it. Inside, Lily whispered again, softer now. "You won't leave me, right? You'll stay, no matter what." Shadow nudged closer, lowering his head onto her lap. His scarred body curled protectively around her small frame. Daniel's vision blurred. He turned away quietly, retreating down the hall, his footsteps careful not to betray that he had been there. In the solitude of his room, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floorboards. For years, he had carried the guilt of being unable to hold his marriage together, of watching his daughter's heart fracture when her mother walked out. He had prayed for something, anything, that might help patch those wounds he couldn't reach. And now, somehow, it had arrived, limping, scarred, sold for $5 on a street corner. Shadow wasn't just saving dogs, he was saving them. Back in Lily's room, her breaths finally slowed, her fingers tangled in Shadow's fur. Scout stirred once, shifting closer into the crook of Shadow's chest. The three of them, child, survivor, and pup, fell into a rhythm of quiet, steady breathing. And in the silence of the night, a fragile but undeniable truth settled over the Hayes home. The broken had found one another, and together they were becoming whole again. The rain came down steady that morning, streaking the windows of the Hayes house and turning Maple Creek streets into mirrors of gray. Daniel sat at his desk, a mug of coffee cooling untouched by his elbow. The glow of his computer screen cast his face in pale light. On the screen blinked the words pulled from the warehouse logs. Unit X14, Lot 22, B batch, cold, coded, detached, yet unmistakably tied to suffering. At first the search yielded nothing. He narrowed filters, dug into the archives. Finally, a result surfaced. Kennel X14. Once a licensed boarding facility outside Maple Creek, its permit had lapsed 7 years earlier after the sudden death of its owner. The land had slipped into foreclosure, forgotten. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. An abandoned kennel. Perfect cover. Use an old ID, keep the operation off the books, and no one looks twice. He opened the drawer where the warehouse evidence sat. Logbooks full of dates and codes, a few envelopes. His hand froze on one, the faded ink barely legible. X14, hold. From the hallway came the sound of claws on wood. Shadow limped into the office, Scout trotting at his side. The shepherd eased down beside Daniel's chair, eyes steady, scars half-healed under Lily's careful hands. "You led me to this," Daniel murmured, stroking his head. Now I have to finish what you started. The phone buzzed, making him jump. The number was blocked. He answered anyway. A voice, low and urgent. You're looking into X14, aren't you? If you want proof, go to Miller's Quarry, South Path. You'll hear them before you see them. The line went dead. Daniel sat frozen, the static still in his ear. Shadow's ears pricked, body tense. Miller's Quarry. A scar of land at the county's edge. Half-flooded pits, rusting machinery, a place of dares and whispered stories, reports of howling, crates hauled under cover of night. He'd written it off as drunken tales. Now it was part of a triangle. The warehouse, the abandoned kennel, and the quarry. Daniel pulled a map from the shelf and circled the 3 points. His chest tightened. Not random. Connected. He looked at Shadow, then at Lily's photo on his desk. Her wide smile, bright eyes. He couldn't afford to walk away. "Come on," he said, grabbing his jacket. "If they want me to see, then we'll see." Shadow rose slowly, steady despite his limp. The road to the quarry wound through dripping trees, gravel crunching under Daniel's boots. Mist clung low to the ground, swallowing the beam of his flashlight. Shadow padded at his side, each step silent. Even wounded, he moved like a soldier, ears pricked, nose lifted, senses alive. Twice he halted, nostrils flaring, body taut. Daniel trusted that more than any compass. The quarry cliffs loomed ahead, jagged against the sky. Rusted excavators jutted like skeletons. Beyond the drip of water came another sound. Thin, fractured. Whimpers. Daniel froze. He killed the light and crouched low. Shadow mirrored him, trembling with coiled energy. The sounds grew clearer. Whining, chains rattling, claws scraping. They crept forward until the clearing opened below them. Floodlights blazed harsh white over a makeshift compound pressed against the quarry walls. Cages lined the ground in rows, each stuffed with dogs. Muzzles pressed against rusted bars, eyes wide, fur matted. Some barked hoarsely, others lay unmoving. The air reeked of waste, rust, and blood. Daniel's throat burned. He snapped quick photos with his phone, his hands shaking. Beside him, Shadow's growl vibrated low. He wanted to charge, but he held his ground, waiting. Voices cut through the night. 3 men emerged from a shack. Daniel recognized the broad-shouldered one instantly, scar across his cheek, black hair plastered by rain, Marcus Vane, the name from old files, the ghost of extortion cases, whispered but never proven. Luther lumbered beside him, crowbar dangling like a toy. Clem trailed close, wiry, knife glinting restless in his hands. Marcus crouched by a husky's cage, gripping the bars. "You'll fetch a good price," he murmured. He jerked his chin toward 2 cages where dogs barely stirred. The rest, waste. Clem's laugh was sharp, cruel. Luther only spat. Daniel's fists curled. Every nerve screamed to move. But 3 armed men, dozens of cages, 1 wrong move, and it would all burn. Shadow quivered beside him, eyes fixed on Marcus. Daniel laid a hand on his back. "Not yet, boy. Not tonight." But Marcus seemed to sense them. He straightened, gaze sweeping the tree line. His voice carried calm, deliberate. "A man can hide in the shadows all he wants, but shadows don't keep his family safe." Daniel's chest clenched. Marcus's eyes cut toward the woods, a cruel smile curling. "You've got a little girl, don't you, Officer Hayes? 8 years old, blonde hair, big eyes. Lily, isn't it?" Daniel's stomach dropped. His finger twitched near his holster. Shadow growled, low and dangerous. Marcus flicked his cigarette away. I do my homework. You think you're hunting me? I've already got a file on you. Be a shame if one of my men paid your porch a visit while your daughter's out there drawing in her sketchbook. Rage surged hot in Daniel's chest. He shifted, gravel crunching under his boot. Marcus's head snapped toward the sound. There he is. His hand shot up. Luther and Clem charged, crowbar and knife flashing under the lights. Daniel raised his weapon, but Shadow moved first. The shepherd burst from the brush with a snarl, colliding with Clem. His jaws locked on the man's arm, the knife spinning into the dirt. Clem shrieked, stumbling back. Luther swung his crowbar in a vicious arc. Shadow dodged, lunging again, forcing the giant off balance. Daniel fired a warning shot into the air. The crack thundered through the quarry. "Police, drop it!" Marcus only laughed, arms folded. "You think one bullet changes this? You don't know who you're dealing with, Hayes." Shadow circled back, teeth bared, body shielding Daniel. His stance was clear. "You'll touch him over my dead body." Daniel's pulse hammered. He wanted to drag Marcus down then and there. But Lily's face flashed in his mind, her trust, her innocence. He couldn't risk dying in this pit and leaving her exposed. "Fall back," he hissed, gripping Shadow's collar. The shepherd resisted, snarling, then stepped back in sync with him. Marcus didn't follow. He only stood, smiling that scarred smile. "Run home, officer. Hug your little girl tight. Because next time," his voice dropped to a growl, "you won't have the dog to save you." The laughter followed them into the trees, echoing long after the floodlights disappeared. Only when they reached the ridge did Daniel stop, bracing on his knees, lungs burning. Shadow pressed against him, blood flecking his muzzle where he'd torn into Clem. Daniel gripped the shepherd's fur, trembling. "You saved me," he whispered. His voice cracked. "You saved us both." Shadow licked his hand once, deliberate, steady. Not duty, loyalty. Daniel drew a shuddering breath. The fight wasn't just about cages anymore. Marcus Vane had made it personal. He had threatened Lily, and that meant war. The Hayes home was quiet that night, but it was the kind of quiet that hummed with tension rather than peace. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his badge and service weapon laid out before him, staring into the darkened window. The reflection that stared back looked older than he remembered, lined with exhaustion, shadowed with guilt. Shadow lay across the doorway, both sentinel and barrier, scout curled against his chest. The shepherd's eyes stayed open, watching his handler with unyielding focus. Marcus Vane's voice replayed in Daniel's mind, sharp as broken glass. "You've got a little girl, don't you? Lily, isn't it?" The thought made his hands tremble against the wood of the table. Marcus knew too much. Worse, he had made it personal. "Daddy?" The voice was small, fragile. Daniel's head jerked up. Lily stood in the doorway, hair tangled from sleep, her stuffed rabbit dangling. Her grey eyes, his eyes, were wide and brimming. "You should be in bed," he said softly, steadying his voice. She shook her head. "I couldn't sleep." She hesitated, clutching the rabbit tighter. "Because I followed you tonight." The words froze him. "What?" "I followed you," she whispered, stepping closer. "I saw you go into the woods with Shadow. I was scared you wouldn't come back. So I followed." Her small shoulders trembled. "I heard him. That man with the scar. He said my name." Her voice cracked. "Daddy, I'm so scared." Daniel was out of his chair instantly, gathering her into his arms as sobs racked her body. He cradled her head, gripping her shoulders as if he could shield her from everything with sheer will. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. His throat burned. "I never wanted you to hear that. I never wanted you to feel this fear." She pulled back, tears streaking her cheeks. "Promise me you won't go back. Please. He'll hurt you." Every instinct screamed to promise, but he couldn't. Not when Marcus still held those dogs captive. Not when Shadow's scars demanded justice. His silence was answer enough. "You are going back," she whispered, her face crumpling. "You'll leave me, just like Mom did." The words pierced deeper than any blade. Daniel pulled her close again. "No, not like that. I'll never leave you." Shadow rose then, padding forward on his limp. He pressed his scarred body against Lily's side, lowering his head into her lap. Her fingers slid into his fur, clinging like an anchor. Slowly, her sobs eased into hiccuping breaths. Daniel watched, his chest heavy with gratitude. Shadow was more than a dog. He was the bridge between father and daughter, the heartbeat that reminded them both they weren't alone. When Lily finally quieted, she leaned her forehead against the shepherd's head. "Don't let him go," she whispered. "Don't let Daddy go back." Shadow's eyes flicked up to Daniel's, steady and unrelenting. Daniel stroked her hair. "I'll be careful. I swear it. He won't win, Lily. Not while we're together." Exhaustion claimed her. Daniel carried her upstairs, Shadow following close, and tucked her into bed. Shadow curled at her feet. Scout nestled beside him. The sight of them guarding her seared itself into Daniel's heart. From the doorway he whispered to the empty house, "This fight isn't mine alone anymore. It's ours, and I won't let him take anything more from us." Morning broke grey and unsettled, light spilling half-heartedly across Maple Creek. Daniel sat on the porch with a mug of cold coffee, Lily's trembling confession echoing in his mind. "He said my name." Shadow prowled the yard, nose pressed to the ground. Scout trailed clumsily behind. At the far fence, Shadow stopped, stiffened, and began pawing at the soil. Daniel crossed quickly, crouching beside him. His fingers brushed dirt from cold iron. A rusted key ring emerged, 3 heavy keys etched with worn markings. Unit B, 712X. Daniel's stomach tightened. He glanced at Shadow, who watched him with heaving chest and unwavering eyes. "You remembered," Daniel murmured, voice reverent. "You brought me this." Shadow hadn't stumbled on anything by chance. His body carried maps etched in pain, memories Marcus had tried to bury. Daniel pocketed the keys just as the screen door creaked. Lily padded out barefoot, rabbit in hand. She glanced at the keys, then at Shadow. "He's trying to help, isn't he?" Daniel nodded, his chest aching. "Yeah, like always." Shadow leaned into her touch, then looked back at Daniel, urging him to keep going. Daniel rose, fist closing around the keys. "Whatever these open, we'll find it." But fear threaded his resolve. Every clue drew them deeper into Marcus's world, and Marcus had already marked Lily. By afternoon, clouds gathered like an army. Daniel stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. "Carla, bring your bolt cutters and your badge. Meet me behind Miller's Quarry at 2100 hours." He hung up, then called Jordan. "Flashlight and gloves. This won't be clean." He reached the few officers he trusted. No questions, just loyalty. When the last call ended, silence pressed in, broken only by Shadow's nails scraping the floor as he paced near the door. He felt the storm coming, not just the rain, but the reckoning. A creak of the stairs. Lily stood halfway down, clutching the banister, eyes wide. "Daddy," she whispered, "you're going back, aren't you?" Daniel's chest tightened. "I have to, Lily. There are more dogs, more places like the one Shadow showed us. We can't look away now." Her face crumpled, but she didn't cry. She stepped down, squaring her small shoulders. "Then I'm coming too." The words hit him like a blow. "Absolutely not. They know your name, Lily. That makes this even more dangerous." She trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "That's why I can't stay here. What if they come while you're gone? What if Shadow isn't here? I'll be alone." Shadow padded forward, pressing between them with a low rumble, not of threat, but insistence. "She's not wrong." Daniel rubbed his face. He wanted to say no, but he remembered her whisper. "They know about me, don't they? Keeping her far away might not mean keeping her safe." Finally, he nodded. "All right. But you stay in the car. Shadow stays with you. Seatbelt on. Door locked. No exceptions." Relief flooded her face. "I promise." Shadow barked once, sealing the pact. Daniel cupped her face. "I'm trusting you, Lily. More than ever." "I won't break it," she whispered. The storm broke as they drove out of town. Rain lashed the windshield, wipers thrashing. Headlights cut through fog, turning back roads into corridors of shadow and light. Lily sat in the back beside Shadow, blanket wrapped tight, Scout crated at her side. Her small hand stayed buried in the shepherd's fur. Shadow sat tall, ears pricked, body angled protectively between her and the storm. Daniel gripped the wheel, every nerve tuned to the coming fight. His phone buzzed once. Carla in position, Jordan already scouting. "Almost there," he murmured. Thunder cracked overhead. For an instant, lightning lit Shadow's scarred face in the rearview mirror, unyielding, steadfast. Daniel felt a strange calm. Whatever waited at the quarry, they would face it together. The storm belonged to Marcus, but the fight that followed would belong to them. The storm had swallowed Maple Creek whole. Rain hammered the earth in relentless sheets, flooding ditches and carving rivulets through the dirt roads. Trees groaned in the wind, branches whipping like arms of some great beast. It was the kind of night that drove men indoors. But for Daniel Hayes and the 3 officers who trusted him most, there would be no shelter, no retreat. Daniel killed the cruiser's engine. Darkness surged in, broken only by taillights and distant lightning. In the back seat, Lily clutched her blanket tight. Shadow sat pressed against her, rigid and alert, ears forward. The shepherd's stillness only sharpened the storm around them. Daniel leaned in, voice low. "Stay here. Do not open the doors. No matter what you hear, you stay with Shadow." Lily nodded, burying her hand in the dog's fur. Shadow leaned into her touch, then fixed Daniel with a look, part command, part promise. Daniel stepped into the storm. Rain soaked him instantly, but his focus never wavered. Carla and Jordan crouched under the trees, rain dripping off their caps. "Perimeter's quiet," Jordan reported. "No guards outside. East fence, still lit." "Your call, Hayes," Carla said, bolt cutters ready. Daniel glanced once at the cruiser. Lily's words whispered through his mind. "I promise." He turned back, jaw set. "We move now. Quiet and fast." Shadow slipped from the car at Daniel's signal, moving like liquid through the mud. The team followed his lead, weaving through underbrush, branches clawing at their jackets. The storm muffled the world, but every sound still rang sharp. The squelch of boots, a twig snapping, the metallic clang of something shifting ahead. Daniel raised a fist. Shadow froze, one paw lifted, nose pointed. Through the rain, a chain-link fence emerged, barbed wire tangled with vines. Lantern light flickered under a sagging tarp roof, casting grotesque shadows. Then came the sound, thin, desperate whines, threading through the storm. Daniel's chest tightened. Shadow growled low, the sound vibrating through the earth. Carla swore softly. "God, it's real." "Cut us in," Daniel ordered. The lock snapped under Carla's cutters. Shadow slipped inside first, the team on his heels. The air hit them heavy, rot, rust, unwashed fur. Lantern light wavered across skeletal shapes pressed against bars. Some dogs lifted their heads weakly. Others didn't move at all. Shadow stopped at one cage. Inside, a young shepherd lifted its head, ribs etched stark beneath its filthy coat. A faint whimper escaped, and Shadow answered with a quiet chuff, tender as a promise. Daniel had to look away to keep his focus. Lightning split the sky, throwing the compound into stark, merciless relief. Rusted kennels stacked high, skeletal dogs trembling in filth, cruelty carved into every corner. Then darkness slammed back, heavier than before. "Voices," Jordan hissed, pointing to a shed at the far end. Weapons drawn, they advanced. Shadow led, body taut as wire, every step deliberate. Something shifted. A blur lunged from behind pallets. Luther, gaunt face twisted, crowbar swinging for Daniel's skull. Daniel ducked, the bar whistling past. Before he could aim, Shadow launched, teeth burying into Luther's leg. The man howled, staggering, as he swung fists at the dog's flank. Shadow held, growl ripping through the storm. Then Clem appeared, broad-shouldered, blade flashing. He charged. Daniel pivoted, gun raised, but mud slicked his boots. The knife slashed closer. Shadow released Luther, spinning mid-air. His jaws clamped Clem's wrist, the blade clattering to the ground. Daniel fired a shot into the air. "On the ground!" His voice cracked like thunder. But Luther snatched the crowbar again, limping toward him, eyes wild. "Don't," Daniel warned, weapon leveled. Lightning lit the chaos. Cages rattling, Shadow's teeth sunk into Clem's arm. Luther raising the crowbar for another strike. And then came the sound Daniel dreaded. "Daddy!" His heart seized. Lily was running through the storm, sneakers splashing in mud, blanket abandoned. "Lily, back!" Daniel roared. But she didn't stop. Her eyes fixed on a back cage, where a white Labrador lay trembling, fur matted with blood. No sound, no fight, just broken eyes. Lily dropped to her knees, fumbling with the latch. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got you." The lock gave, and she slipped inside, wrapping her arms around the frail dog. "I won't leave you." "Your name is Grace." Daniel's chest split. Terror, relief, helpless pride. For a moment, even the men stilled at the sight of the child. Then Clem roared, shoving against Shadow. Luther swung down. Shadow hurled himself between the blow and Daniel. The crowbar slammed into his flank with a sickening crack. The shepherd crumpled, then forced himself up, blood streaking his fur, growl shaking the compound. Daniel fired, the bullet biting into a post inches from Luther's head. "Drop it!" Carla and Jordan stormed in, cuffing the men into the mud. Rain hammered the tin roof, drowning curses beneath the cries of caged dogs. Daniel stumbled to the back cage. Lily clung to Grace, tears mixing with rain. The Labrador's tail thumped faintly, a spark of life. Daniel pulled them both close. "You're insane," he whispered, voice breaking. "Do you know what could have—" Relief swallowed his words. "Don't you ever do that again." "I couldn't leave her," Lily whispered. "She needed me." Shadow limped to them, flank bleeding, eyes steady. He pressed against Lily's leg, his head heavy in her lap. She sobbed, clutching both dogs. Then the shed door slammed open. Marcus Vane burst into the storm, duffel bag clutched tight, lantern light outlining his hulking frame. He tore through cages, sending them crashing as he sprinted for the tree line. "Marcus!" Daniel shouted. The man didn't stop. Shadow surged forward, limp barely slowing him. He slammed into Marcus's arm, teeth tearing through fabric. Marcus swung the duffel hard, knocking the dog aside. Shadow staggered, then rose again, mud dripping, growl unbroken. Carla intercepted, baton cracking against Marcus's knee. He collapsed, Shadow pinning him by the arm, until Daniel slapped cuffs on his wrists. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Marcus spat. "All I need to know," Daniel said coldly, "is you're finished here." Marcus was dragged off, snarling. Shadow limped back to Lily, lowering himself beside her, as if the fight had finally drained from his body. "You're okay," she whispered through tears, pressing her face to his scarred head. "Please don't leave me." Around them, cages snapped open one by one. Dogs staggered out into the storm, some too weak to stand, others barking hoarsely at freedom. A terrier stumbled into Daniel's arms, trembling. He set it gently down, his hands shaking. By the time the last door swung wide, the compound had changed. Lightning flashed, revealing dozens of shapes moving through mud, tails wagging faintly, eyes blinking against the rain. Lily cradled Grace, Shadow's head heavy in her lap. Daniel knelt beside them, resting a hand on his daughter's back. She looked up, eyes shining. "Daddy, we saved them." Daniel's throat ached. "No, Lily, he did." Shadow's tired eyes lifted to his. Rain softened, as if even the storm paused. Within that gaze burned something indestructible. Duty, loyalty, love. Daniel bowed his head. "You're the bravest partner I've ever had." The night was far from over. Transport vans, reports, Marcus's warning still looming. But kneeling in the mud with his daughter, the shepherd, and the broken Labrador, Daniel felt something shift. The storm still raged, but in that place of cages and chains, something fragile had begun. By the time dawn broke over Maple Creek, the storm had passed, leaving streets glazed with rain, and a silence that felt almost reverent. At the compound near the quarry, headlights cut through lingering mist as transport vans rolled in. Officers guided freed dogs into crates lined with blankets, while volunteers and veterinary staff worked quickly, hands steady despite fatigue. The yard was alive with motion. Radios crackling, clipboards shuffling, dogs barking hoarsely as they were lifted from cages into safety. Some staggered on weak legs, eyes clouded with fear, yet glimmering with relief. Others lay limp in officers' arms, clinging to life with a stubbornness that felt almost sacred. Daniel moved among them, uniform damp, boots caked in mud. Every time a dog was loaded into a van, A knot loosened in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was making something right. Shadow stayed close, limping but alert, scanning each departing crate, as though every life leaving the yard was his responsibility. Lily sat on the bumper of a van, Grace's head in her lap, Scout tucked in a blanket beside her. Despite exhaustion, she smiled faintly, the fragile smile of a child who had seen both cruelty and redemption in one night. When the last van pulled away, its taillights fading into the pale dawn, Daniel finally exhaled. The compound stood empty now, cages gaping like broken mouths. What had once been a place of suffering was now evidence. Later that morning, the precinct smelled of stale coffee and wet paper. Daniel sat at his desk, pen scratching across endless forms. Animals seized, suspects detained, weapons catalogued. His eyes blurred with fatigue, but he forced his hand steady. Paperwork was the backbone of justice. Without it, last night's rescue could dissolve into rumor. Across the hall, Marcus's men sat in holding cells. Clem stared out with bloodshot eyes, defiant. Luther muttered curses, leg bandaged. Their bluster had faded, replaced by something smaller, fear. Carla intercepted Daniel outside the observation room. Her expression was taut. "Luther cracked," she said. Daniel's pulse sharpened. "How much?" "Enough. Marcus ran the cages, but there's someone bigger. A name they're terrified to say." She glanced toward the cell where Luther hunched over, speaking rapidly to the interviewer, eyes flicking to the camera as if someone might be watching. Daniel's jaw tightened. Marcus's sneer in the mud echoed back. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Shadow shifted beside him, nails clicking softly against tile. Even here, in sterile light, the dog's steady presence was grounding. Daniel exhaled. "Then we climb the chain. Whoever's above Marcus, we bring them down, brick by brick." Marcus waited in the interview room, cuffs clamped to the table. His black hair hung in clumps, a bruise blooming along his jaw. Despite the night's defeat, his eyes burned with arrogant amusement. He smirked as Daniel entered, Shadow at his side. "If it isn't the hero of Maple Creek and the Mutt." He leaned back, chains rattling. "What's the matter, Hayes? Need backup from a dog to feel like a man?" Daniel didn't sit. He stood across the table, gaze steady. Shadow lowered to a sit at his side, scarred body radiating quiet power. "You ran a prison for animals," Daniel said, voice even but edged. "You profited off their pain." Marcus's smirk widened. "Business." "They were rejects, injured, discarded, worthless, unless you know how to make them useful." He jerked his chin at Shadow. "That one's proof, limping, scarred, past his prime. Tell me who'd pay for a broken dog." The words hung sharp as knives. Daniel's hand curled into a fist, but Shadow didn't move. His calm eyes met Daniel's, steady, unshaken. Daniel leaned closer, voice low but cutting. "You don't get it. This dog has saved more lives in 2 weeks than you have in your miserable life. He stood between my daughter and your men's blades. He survived everything you call worthless. And he's still here, still fighting, still protecting." Marcus scoffed, though unease flickered at his jaw. "Poetic, but loyalty doesn't buy power." "No," Daniel said, his voice rising. "It builds families, communities. It's why you're in cuffs and why he's the reason your empire of cages is rubble. You call him broken. He's stronger than you'll ever be." Shadow's low growl filled the room, vibrating through the steel table. For the first time, Marcus's smirk faltered. "You think you've won," Marcus hissed. "I was just the caretaker. The one above me. You'll never touch him. He's the real leash holder." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't blink. "Then we find him. And we finish this." He knocked on the door. The guard opened it. As Daniel left, Shadow turned back once, holding Marcus's gaze until the man shifted uneasily in his chair. The records room smelled of dust and old ink. Files lay spread across the oak table, logbooks from the compound, ledgers from Marcus's desk. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead. Daniel scanned pages with bleary eyes. Shadow lay at his feet, chest rising slowly, but his ears stayed pricked, unwilling to rest. Carla entered, dropping a fresh folder with a thud. "From the State Archives. You're not going to like it." Daniel flipped through. Names, dates, transfer orders. One name leapt out, Joseph Carter. The memory hit like ice water. "Marcus's partner," Daniel muttered. Carla's voice was grim. "Not just partner, mentor. He disappeared 6 years ago after disciplinary trouble. But before that, he was a civilian contractor, K9 units." Daniel froze. "He trained dogs." Carla nodded. "Reports say he pushed them past breaking. Injuries, malnourishment, psychological damage. Recommended dismissal, but it was buried. 2 weeks later he vanished. And not long after. Shadow was listed as retired, medical." Daniel's breath caught. He pulled a photo from the file. A young German shepherd, coat sleek, eyes sharp, a K9 tag glinting at his collar. The name beneath, Valor. His throat tightened. It was Shadow, before the scars, before betrayal. "He was decorated," Daniel whispered. "One of the best," Carla said softly. Anger surged through him. "And Carter threw him away. Sold him like trash." Shadow stirred, pressing his head against Daniel's leg, as if recognizing the truth spoken aloud. Daniel dropped to one knee, cupping the shepherd's face. "You weren't broken. They broke faith with you. And you kept going. You kept protecting, even when no one came back for you." The dog leaned into his touch with a low sigh, eyes carrying sorrow and resilience both. Carla cleared her throat. "Luther says Carter still moves through Clearbrook. Quiet. But he bankrolls it all. Marcus was middle management. Carter runs the top." Daniel rose, fury hardening into resolve. "Then Carter's the one we go after. For every scar on this dog's body, for every cage last night. It ends with him." Carla glanced at Shadow. "Funny thing about scars," she murmured. "Sometimes they're proof of survival, not weakness." Daniel nodded, his voice softened. "He's not Shadow anymore. He's Valor. He always was." For a moment, silence pressed heavy in the flickering light. Then Daniel gathered the files, sliding the photo into his jacket pocket, not as evidence, but as a reminder. He looked down at the shepherd, who stood proud despite the limp, scars etched like battle honors. "We're not done, partner. We're just getting started." Valor's tail gave a faint wag. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the ache in his chest shift. Not grief, not regret, but purpose. The true villain had a name, and the reckoning was coming. The Hayes home sat quiet beneath morning sunlight. The storm had passed days ago, but its echoes lingered in tired bodies and scarred eyes. Even the house seemed to breathe slower, as if aware that something fragile was taking root inside its walls. Shadow limped across the wooden floor, his left hind leg dragging from the crowbar's strike. Each step was weary, but his gaze remained steady. He no longer prowled like a hunted animal. He moved with the dignity of one who had endured and chosen peace. In the living room, Lily sat cross-legged on the rug with Scout and Grace pressed against her. Scout had grown stronger, his ribs less sharp, his clumsy paws carrying him in wild circles before collapsing happily beside her. Grace, the battered Labrador, lay with her head in Lily's lap. Her eyes, once dulled by despair, now glimmered faintly with trust. Every stroke of Lily's hand seemed to erase a little of the darkness she had known. Daniel leaned in the doorway, arms folded. The sound of his daughter's voice drifting between the dogs filled the room like sunlight. For years, his home had echoed with silence, an emptiness no badge could mend. Now, it was alive again, with paws tapping on hardwood, with Lily's laughter, with tails drumming against rugs and furniture. Shadow lowered himself with a sigh near the coffee table. Lily crawled to him, laying her small hand across his broad head. "You don't have to move so much," she whispered. "Just rest. I'll take care of you." Daniel's throat tightened. Shadow's eyes flickered shut, surrendering to her touch, as if it was enough to anchor him. Lily prepared a nest of blankets in her room, guiding Grace gently into it. "You can sleep here until you're ready," she murmured. Grace circled once and settled, her eyes never leaving the little girl. Shadow lingered in the doorway, posture weary but protective. Daniel joined him. "She's healing them," he said quietly, "and they're healing her." Shadow pressed his muzzle against Daniel's leg in silent agreement. Days slipped into rhythm. Daniel carried Shadow outside each morning, easing him into the yard where dew jeweled the grass. Scout tumbled after butterflies. Grace stretched stiff legs, and Lily ran barefoot through the wet lawn, laughter scattering the quiet. Shadow kept to the porch shade, always watching. Meals became rituals. Lily ladled broth into bowls with solemn care. Grace's ribs filled out, her appetite growing. Scout devoured his portion and nosed into Shadow's dish until the older shepherd nudged him back with gentle authority. "He's teaching him manners," Lily giggled. At night, Lily read aloud from storybooks. Shadow curled outside her door, Grace pressed near his flank, Scout nestled at her feet. Together they formed a barricade of warmth around the girl who had endured too much loss. One evening, Daniel lingered in the hallway. Lily's voice trailed into silence. The bed creaked as she curled under blankets. Shadow lifted his head, meeting Daniel's gaze in the dim glow of the nightlight. "You're holding this family together," Daniel whispered. Shadow blinked slowly, then lowered his head again. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not grief, not guilt, but gratitude. The scars on Shadow's body were no longer marks of defeat. They were proof of survival. The idea came quietly. Daniel was mending the sagging fence one afternoon, while Lily painted under the oak tree. Grace lay nearby on a quilt, her eyes following Shadow's calm watch. The house no longer felt like morning. It pulsed with life again. But Daniel knew there were still dogs waiting, scarred, timid, overlooked. He glanced toward Shadow and thought, we could do more. That evening, as Lily helped with dishes, he asked, what if we fixed up the yard? Not just for Scout and Grace, but for others. For the ones still waiting. Her plate nearly slipped. Like a real place for them. A home? A sanctuary, Daniel said. A safe haven. Her face lit up. We could call it Haven's Light, she whispered. Because it would be like a light when everything was dark before. The name is rooted deep. Haven's Light. Neighbors rallied faster than Daniel expected. Carla arrived with bags of kibble. Retired carpenter Mr. Hill brought lumber and built a sturdy pen. A local vet offered weekend checkups. Children from Lily's school brought jars of coins. The backyard transformed. Wooden shelters rose by the fence. Hay spread for warmth. Troughs filled with fresh water. Lanterns strung between trees glowed at dusk. Soft light washing over mismatched pots of flowers Lily had planted. Shadow watched from the grass, scarred body still, but eyes alert. Grace explored with growing confidence, her tail wagging faintly. Scout dashed everywhere, unstoppable, as if he knew this place wasn't just for him. One evening, Daniel and Lily stood side by side at the yard's edge. Lanterns glowed over new pens, where 2 rescued dogs, an old hound and a nervous collie, slept soundly. Lily slipped her hand into his. "Do you think they'll feel safe here?" Daniel's gaze lingered on Shadow, posted near the gate like a sentinel. "Yes," he said softly, "because they'll know they're wanted." Lily leaned into him. "It feels like a family now. Bigger than just us." The words cut deep. Family wasn't only blood. It could be built anew, stronger for its scars. Later that night, Daniel sat at the table with a small metal box open before him. Inside lay commendations, old photographs, and a single tag shaped like a badge. The engraving was faded, but still clear. Canine Valor. The name Shadow once carried. The name was stripped from him when Joseph Carter had discarded him. Daniel turned it over in his palm, remembering his own first partner and the pride of that badge. To know that Shadow, Valor, had once stood at the side of men who called themselves protectors, only to be betrayed, tore at him. Shadow rose from the rug and limped to his side, laying his muzzle on Daniel's knee. Daniel curled his fingers into his fur. "You should have never lost this," he whispered. He threaded the tag onto a collar and fastened it around the shepherd's neck. The metal gleamed in lantern light. Daniel pressed his hand against it. "You earned this long ago. No one can take it from you again." For a heartbeat, Shadow was still. Then he leaned forward, pressing his head into Daniel's chest. Tears slipped down Daniel's cheeks, soaking into fur. "You weren't broken," he whispered. "They failed you, but you never stopped being who you are." Shadow's tail thumped once, soft but louder than any applause. When Daniel pulled back, the dog's eyes glowed steady, the tag catching the light as if it had waited for this moment. For the first time, Daniel didn't just see a survivor. He saw valor. Together they stepped onto the porch. Lanterns swayed gently over the sanctuary that had grown from pain into hope. Daniel knelt once more, hand resting on the tag. "This place is yours as much as mine. You showed us the way." Shadow lifted his head toward the yard, where rescued dogs rested in peace. "You're not just a survivor," Daniel whispered. "You're the heart of this family." The tag glinted in the lantern glow, a symbol not of betrayal, but of resilience. The night settled calm around them, and Daniel made one last vow. Whatever comes, we face it together, always. The tag chimed softly, as if in answer. The morning broke golden over the Hayes backyard. Haven's light, once a patch of dirt and sagging fences, was alive. Lanterns still swung between the oak trees, but daylight outshone them now. Lily's hand-painted signs fluttered in the breeze. Welcome home. Second chances. Haven's light. It was adoption day. Cars lined the street and families trickled through the gate with cautious steps that soon softened into smiles. Children tugged at their parents' hands, peering wide-eyed at the dogs who wagged tentative tails from their pens. The air hummed with laughter, paw beats, and the delighted squeals of children discovering new companions. Daniel stood at the gate, shaking hands, directing volunteers. His uniform shirt, tucked neatly into jeans, bridged the officer and the father. Tired as he was, his eyes held quiet pride. Lily darted from pen to pen with Scout bounding beside her. She explained each dog's quirks in breathless sincerity. He loves belly rubs, but not loud noises. She curls up when she sleeps, but always wags when you come close. People listened, really listened, because in her voice was no pity, only love. Grace, the Labrador Lily had carried from the compound, waited beneath the oak. Her coat was smoother now, her body stronger. A couple knelt at her pen, speaking softly, offering their hands. Grace's tail thumped faintly. Lily hesitated, biting her lip. Grace had been hers in a way. Letting go felt like losing part of her heart. Daniel crouched beside her. It's hard, isn't it? Loving them enough to let them go. What if they don't love her the way we do? Lily whispered. He guided her gaze to the couple. The woman stroked Grace's ears with infinite gentleness, the man whispering steady comfort. Grace leaned into their touch. Look at her, Daniel said. Dogs know. We were just her bridge. Lily pressed her cheek to Grace's head. Be happy. You're safe now. Grace licked her face once, then turned toward the couple. When they slipped a leash around her neck, she followed without fear. She chose them, Lily whispered. And you gave her the chance, Daniel replied. Scout leapt into her arms as if on cue, licking away the tears until she laughed again. By midday, families carried dogs through the gate, papers signed, tails wagging proudly. Volunteers passed lemonade and cookies. Neighbors lingered to share stories. Haven's light no longer belonged only to Daniel and Lily. It belonged to the whole town. Shadow, Valor, sat beneath the oak, his collar tag glinting. Children paused to pat him. Parents nodded respectfully. But he always returned to his post near Daniel and Lily, the quiet heart of it all. When the last family left, Lily leaned against her father. We did it. No, Daniel said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You did. You and Shadow. She looked toward the shepherd resting in the grass. Scout curled against him. Her small hand found Daniel's. We're a family now. All of us. Daniel's chest tightened. For years he had carried loss like a second skin. But here, with laughter echoing faintly in the sanctuary, he realized they had built something stronger than what had been taken. A family of second chances. That evening, quiet settled over the house. The kind of quiet born not of emptiness, but of fullness. Lily sat at the kitchen table, colored pencils scattered across the wood. Scout snored at her feet. Grace dozed near the back door, and Shadow stretched along the floor, eyes steady in the lamplight. Daniel watched from the doorway as she worked with uncharacteristic focus. At last, she looked up, cheeks flushed with pride. Daddy, come see. He sat beside her as she slid the paper forward. 3 figures stood in bright pencil strokes, a tall man in uniform, a girl holding his hand, and between them, a large shepherd, ears proud, eyes kind. Around them she'd sketched their home, trees and flowers. But the placement stilled him. The shepherd wasn't at their side. He was at their center. This is us, Lily whispered, tapping each figure. You, me, And Shadow. Daniel swallowed. You put him in the middle. Because he is. He keeps us together. When Mom left, it was like something was broken. But Shadow fixed it. He made us a family again. The words pierced Daniel, soft, sharp, undeniable. He had thought Shadow's heroism lived in raids and rescues, but here, in a child's drawing, was the truer miracle. This scarred dog had rebuilt a home. Daniel brushed his hand gently through her hair. You're right. He's more than a dog. He's family. Do you think he knows? She asked. As if in answer, Shadow rose and padded over. His limp was pronounced, but his steps held dignity. He pressed his head against her shoulder. See? Lily giggled through wet eyes. He knows. Daniel crouched beside them, one arm around his daughter, the other resting on Shadow's neck. The three stayed in the lamplight, bound by wounds and healing alike. We'll frame this, Daniel said at last, so everyone sees what we built. Later, Daniel opened a small metal box on the table. Inside lay old commendations, photographs, and a single tag shaped like a badge. Its engraving was faded but legible. K9 Valor. The name once stripped from Shadow. Daniel turned it in his hand, throat tight. To know that this shepherd had stood beside men sworn to protect, only to be discarded, tore at him. Shadow limped to his side, laying his muzzle on Daniel's knee. You should have never lost this, Daniel whispered. He slid the tag onto a collar and fastened it gently around Shadow's neck. The metal gleamed in the light. You earned this long ago. No one can take it from you again. For a moment, Shadow was still. Then he pressed his head into Daniel's chest. Tears spilled freely as Daniel held him. You weren't broken. They failed you. But you never stopped being who you are. Shadow's tail thumped once, quiet but resolute. When Daniel pulled back, the tag caught the light as though it had been waiting for this moment. No longer just Shadow. Valor. That night the sanctuary was still. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, fireflies blinking like scattered embers beyond the fence. From inside came the hum of life. Lily whispering goodnight. Scout shifting in dreams. The creak of old floorboards. Shadow stretched across the porch planks, scars softened by moonlight. His ears twitched at every sound, the crickets, the rustle of the maples, the kennels settling. Duty still lived in him, not as command, but as instinct. Yet for once, darkness stood outside the fence. Inside, there was only light. Daniel stepped out with a mug of tea, pausing to watch. You did good, boy, he said quietly, settling into the rocking chair. Moments later, Lily padded out in pajamas, sketchbook clutched to her chest. She curled beside Shadow, tracing the letters on his tag with her fingertip. Good night, Shadow. Good night, Valor. The shepherd closed his eyes, leaning gently into her. Moonlight washed the porch silver. Inside, the house glowed with warmth it hadn't known in years. Laughter taped to the walls, paw prints on the floor. Because sometimes miracles don't roar. Sometimes they limp into our lives, scarred but unbroken, carrying nothing but loyalty and light. Shadow exhaled deeply, releasing his last burdens into the night air. Beyond the fence, the world waited with its storms and shadows, but here, at Haven's Light, a family had chosen him and been chosen in return. The porch light flickered, then steadied. Shadow shifted once more, his tag chiming softly against the wood, a sound as steady as a heartbeat, and the night folded around him like a promise kept. Sometimes the simplest moments remind us what matters most. the steady thump of a tail, the way a pair of kind eyes meet ours, the quiet comfort of knowing we're not alone. German shepherds, with their loyalty and courage, carry that lesson better than most. Shadow's story shows us that even scars, on people or on dogs, can become part of something beautiful when love and trust are given a chance. If you'd like to explore ways to deepen that bond with your own dog, there's a resource I've found meaningful. It's not about training tricks or fancy gear, just about understanding the quiet language our dogs speak. I'll leave the link below in case it feels right for you. Thank you for sharing this time with me and for carrying stories like this in your heart. If it touched you, maybe pass it along to someone who could use a little hope today.